On today's episode, we're sitting down with the magnanimous Mr. Christopher Rose. He is a perinatal anxiety and OCD survivor who volunteers his time at PSI in two capacities: facilitating the dad support group once a month and providing support to dads in the Peer Mentor program. Before becoming a volunteer at PSI, Christopher was a new father struggling to support both his wife's mental health and his own. Luckily, his wife found PSI and the help that they both needed. We are absolutely thrilled to bring you this fresh perspective on what it feels like to become a father and why talking about feelings is where it's at. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the I Am One podcast are the speaker's own. Tuning into this podcast is not a replacement for therapy or any other form of professional help. Our discussions cover personal stories of perinatal mental health disorders and may feel triggering to some listeners. Your number one priority is to take care of yourself. So if you are in need of support, please reach out to the PSI helpline by calling or texting HELP to 1-800-944-4773 for help in English and in Spanish. At PSI, we want you to know you are not alone, you are not to blame, and with help, you will be well. Okay, let's get on with the podcast. Chris, welcome to the podcast studio. It is so good to see you again. We first met you in person for the first time this summer at the annual PSI conference in Kansas City. And I had such a great conversation with you. I knew that we had to have you on the pod. You were willing from the get-go to hop in here with us, and we're finally here. So just really glad that you're willing to be here with us and share some of your experience. So thanks.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here finally.
You only needed a little bit of a gentle nudge from your wife, who said, has he contacted you yet?
Did you do the thing?
Did you do that thing? Did you fill out that form? Anyway, we're so glad that you are either here against your will or are totally willing on your own accord, whatever the case.
Once if
you need help.
If your wife who's on staff at PSI, no, did not make you do this, but that would be funny.
No.
Has signed you up for multiple things at one time?
Listen, every partner does that to their partner. That is just the way of it.
Listen, To be clear, Chris was willing to be here, right, Chris?
Of course. No, I anything I can ever do to give back to PSI and everybody that works with PSI, I will definitely gladly lend my time to that.
Awesome.
Well, Chris, I think without any further ado, could you give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Rose. My pronouns are he, him. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have a wonderful, beautiful wife, Lisette, who works for PSI. And I have an amazing, strong superhero daughter named Sybil, who is turning 3 this upcoming Tuesday.
Oh.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Sybil.
Oh, yeah. She's growing up fast, but I follow the podcast and I'm excited to be here with everybody.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah. Emily, do you want to ask the first question?
Why,
or would you like me to ask the first question?
I will ask the first question. Okay. Chris, can you tell us what role have perinatal mental health complications played in your life? When did they slide into your DMs?
Oh, I would say it started early. They started showing up around when my wife was pregnant. Unfortunately, not until later on, me and Lisette didn't really recognize the symptoms. But after we could take a look back when we were clear-minded, we could start to see kind of the signs and the patterns of perinatal mental health, starting to kind of decline. And then when my daughter was born, things just kind of snowballed from there. As probably most people will tell you, when you're going through postpartum depression, things feel like, you feel like you're drowning, things snowball really fast, it feels like you can't catch your breath or you're just behind on everything. And that's really how it felt for us. My wife, unfortunately, was going through her symptoms, and I was so focused on, our daughter and, my wife that I just put my feelings to the side, put them in the back and just kind of tried to push forward as best as I could. But you could start to see little increments here and there of where I started developing certain types of symptoms anxiety, rage, OCD was a big one for me, among other different, symptoms as well. But it wasn't until like I started going to the PSI groups that I started to learn more about postpartum depression and, how it affects not just moms, but dads. I had no idea that dads could be affected by postpartum depression at all.
So were you attending specifically a dad's support group, online support group?
Yes, I was. But to larger, I was actually going to the parents' PMAG groups.
Oh, cool.
Which, a big shout out to Sarah. She was one of like my first facilitators that I would join the group. And she was super welcoming. And the moms in that group were so awesome. Like sometimes it felt weird because like when you're a dad in those groups, you get kind of like singled out a little bit. Like, oh, there's a dad here. Like almost like a unicorn sighting,
Oh.
Were they like asking you to speak on behalf of all dads the way that you do anytime there's one person in a room?
Yeah, you start to feel like you're the mouthpiece, for dads. And then like, the moms would ask me like, well, how do I get my husband or my boyfriend or my partner to talk about their feelings? And it's like, I don't know them. I don't know. But open communication is an amazing thing. Something me and my wife do daily, even when it's bad communication. But that was like the first group I went to, and that helped me understand postpartum depression from mom's perspective even more. Like, my wife, she was going through it. She was telling me, and obviously like, you're talking to your partner, there could be some things you miss. So getting even more information from the other moms just helped give me that insight. And then I started going to the dad's group with John Carr. And back then they only had one group a month, and it was a battle to get into that group. You had to like sign up, like as soon as the registration went up, you have to sign up for it. Otherwise you're out that month, which then prompted me to like want to be a part of PSI, volunteering to be a dad support group facilitator, to bring an extra group to the dads to help push that initiative forward.
That's awesome. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
When you first saw, or in hindsight, what were some of those like first symptoms? Like what did they look like? What did they feel like for people who, I don't know, might be trying to look back and figure out like where the beginning of the roll downhill was,
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think for me, it was like starting to see characteristics that I never showed as a child or even as a young adult or even as an adult, right? I grew up a very happy-go-lucky kid. I didn't experience anxiety or depression or, nervousness. Like I was just kind of a cool, calm kid. That's just how I was. And then I started to see the change in me where it was like everything made me irritable. Everything was like, even like we'd put our daughter down to sleep, and then I would get mad because the cats were meowing. Because it was like any little sound, right? Like would wake her up. And then in hindsight, I'm like looking at it. My daughter sleeps like a rock. Like that's not going to wake her up. Like she's a great sleeper.
Like trains could go by,
yeah,
right? Like,
no, yeah, totally. Like trains go by our house and, nothing wakes her up. She sleeps like a rock, like I said. But it was those little things that I started to notice, and my wife was noticing in me as well. It was like the anxiety of like putting her down at the right time for her naps. If she misses a nap, what's going to happen? Is she going to go to sleep later? What if she, so there was a lot of things that I was saying that were not in my nature. Thankfully, I started to go to therapy, and, my therapist was helping me pinpoint these little things like OCD. I didn't realize I had OCD. She's like, you're looking at the monitor every 5 minutes. That's OCD. Checking to make sure your daughter's still asleep. That's OCD. And so like, it really opened my eyes to like, oh, wow, like it's not just mental too. It's physical things that could be blocking you and stuff like that. So those are the characteristics that I kind of saw in myself, that like depression was the hardest one, I think. And I remember, one of the things that it's like burned in the back of my mind, I still think about to this day, is I remember it was like a week before Christmas, I think. We had ran into some troubles with our daughter and like her eating when she was first, she was a big baby. She was like 9 pounds when she was born.
Good growing. Nice work.
She was long and she was a big baby. She had like, some feeding problems at the beginning. And so like she lost a little bit of weight, and it wasn't, now that we're mentally stable, I'd say, we're able to look back and say like, the weight that she was losing wasn't really alarming for the size she was, right? Like all babies lose weight it's not a big deal.
And it's proportional to their size.
It's proportional to their size, but our medical provider did not tell us that. So they made us think that it was like this catastrophic thing that our daughter was going through. So obviously that heightens our, mind state even more so now, even with what we're going through, right? And so that just added to it. And I just remember like it was in the middle of the night. The house was decorated. I don't know how me and Lisette decorated the house, but we decorated the house. And I was just sitting in the dark holding Sybil at like 1:00 in the morning. I was just crying. And she was crying. And like, it was just like me talking to her and just telling like, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. I don't know what to do. Like, and it was one of the most like saddening things as a dad, or even as a parent, I guess you could say, like, I just felt like I was like letting her down by not being able to like soothe her. I didn't want to hand her off to Lisette. She was getting the much needed rest that she needed during that time. And so it was just like one of those things where it's just like, it still burns in the back of my mind, but it also contributed a lot to how I saw myself as a dad. And like, you put so much pressure on yourself as a dad to like be this heroic figure to your children, and like you want to be the rock for the family. And now it's like you don't need to do that, right? Like you can share that responsibility of like, I have an amazing partner in Lisette, and it's like I don't have to like hoist the family on my shoulders. Like she's got shoulders too. We can do this together. And so yeah, so it just that night really constantly burns in the back of my brain, especially around this time, because it's like it was hard, like just feeling so helpless. It was hard. It's all a product of like the postpartum depression,
So when you were going through all of that, you were starting to have these feelings of inadequacy, and like you were really having obsessive thinking, and just you were noticing things about yourself that were different than pre-kids. And it's like, well, something's different here. When did you feel comfortable saying how you were feeling? And was it to Lisette? Was it to a provider? Was it, I mean, it sounded like you had a therapist.
It was right away.
Okay.
And actually Lisette,
way to go.
I'm not afraid to share my feelings. Like if I'm sad, I'm sad. If I'm happy,
Yeah.
But it wasn't actually recognized by me first. It was Lisette who recognized it. She had been going to these PSI groups. She was going to like 2 or 3 a day. And like,
Lisette?
because she
frequent flyer miles. Nice work.
She should have had one. Like, yeah,
hey,
I mean,
write that down.
We should get a punch card.
Okay.
A free sweater after your 100th meeting.
We'll get back to you on that one. Hey, we're always bringing the ideas.
Hey, yeah. But no, she needed it. Our healthcare provider just failed us so hard. She needed an outlet. She needed her outlet. And the PSI groups gave her that outlet. And it's a great mixture of like, when you're on the bottom, you see hope by these returning members coming in and sharing their stories and like really giving hope to people who need it. And I think that's what really drawed both of us in. She recognized the symptoms in me right away. And she's like, you need to join these groups. And it wasn't even like a choice. It was like, you need to do this. And so I was like, okay, you're right. I didn't argue with her. I was like, you're right. I don't feel like myself. I feel I don't like how I am right now. So going to the groups and like really just wishing that I knew about these groups earlier, right? Like, it sucks that like we had to suffer in silence for 6 months. And so when we found these groups, we started going, and that's where I started to understand and kind of diagnosed myself at first. And then about, I would say a year later, I started therapy. And so that just helped me understand more of my symptoms and like helping kind of come to terms with the trauma that I had. It's a very interesting thought process of like how childhood trauma builds into postpartum depression and how it affects you as an adult and things like that. And like, so I was very interested in it and I was very accepting of it, and like being able to self-reflect, as you guys will find throughout this podcast. I like talking about myself. I'm okay with it. And so, just talking to my therapist, though, it just like, she lets me go on tangents, and, it's helpful that she was a PMAD survivor as well.
Oh, great. That's really
something
cool.
that we specifically looked in when we were looking for therapists for, both of us is like, does our therapist understand what postpartum depression is, right? I don't need a therapist to tell me that I'm just like having a bad day. I want them to understand, like, they understand why I'm having a bad day, So, but yeah, so that's kind of how we started to pick up on my symptoms.
That's awesome. Yeah. It sounds like you volunteer for PSI support groups. Do you do any other volunteer work at PSI?
I do. I also work with the mentor program. Last year, I worked with like my first dad and still keep in touch with him. And now I'm helping out 2 dads right now. So talking with 2 dads right now. One soon to be dad, and then one dad who's just had their second child. So yeah.
So for people listening, Chris, that don't know much about the Peer Mentor program, what does that look like? So you're a mentor to other dads that are. Sounds like there's one expectant dad and one who is probably a new dad. And what does that look like?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. It's for, it's for people who maybe the group session's they're not really ready for that group session. They want that more one-on-one, like, kind of focal conversation. So we do check-ins via phone or text or Zoom. We work it out at the beginning stages. And then, we just kind of keep it up throughout I think it's like about 6 or 7 months. We work with them. I've continued my relationship with like the dad that I worked with last year. I've continued that relationship with him and just checking in and just saying, hey man, how's it going? I'm glad things are working out for you. I'm still here if you ever need to talk. I mean, I really just keep my line open to them for, if they ever need to get something off their chest. Sometimes it is hard for dads specifically to go to their partner and say like, hey, I'm suffering right now, or I'm going through something, because you're looking at them and saying like, well, you're also going through something right now. You've had the baby all day. So it's like, how can I come and complain to you when you've had so much on your plate? And that's something that I suffered with for a long time too, is, putting my feelings to the back and not really being upfront and honest about how I'm feeling that day. And so this just gives a dad an opportunity to do that, with somebody who's gone through what they've gone through. Right. And I don't come at them with like solutions, or like, I'm not going to fix their problem. I'm here as a listening vessel, so please utilize my ears. I have 2 big ones.
Yeah.
So, God gave me 2 big ears for a reason. So listen. Yeah. And I just tell them like, if there's a days where like you have questions, or if you just need to vent, maybe you had a crappy day, right? You just need to vent. Here's my number. That's kind of how it breaks down. We try to give them a sense of hope, really is what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, man. Peer support. Just being able to have somebody that has been there, or it has, I mean,
there's a lot of dads who don't have somebody near them. Like I have, like my friends, I think people still feel like it's kind of weird to like, maybe you're sitting down in your garage drinking a beer and you're like, today postpartum depression really kicked my butt. How are you feeling? Like there's still that whole like image that dads are, I think, still afraid to like push away. And it's not easy for dads to find other dads who go through postpartum depression, so when you're able to connect with someone, you really want to latch on and just kind of like utilize them for your needs.
If we were going to rebrand postpartum depression for people who identify as a dad, well, how would you rebrand that so that like it would be easier, more relatable? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's in the wording, like we're going to come up with something.
Yeah. I feel like it's like when people start talking about depression, or when they say things like that, or mental health, people still are very like, it's like almost taboo in a way. And they're like afraid to be judged because they're having a hard time with something that theoretically society has told us shouldn't be hard, but is extremely hard. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
being a parent is one of the hardest things in the world for both mom and dad. And if it's not, I think you're lying to yourself, because it's like you feel like you get a grip and then that kid is going to switch things on you.
Every time.
You have to figure it all out all over again,
Enter new stage of development and all the rules change.
It's like walking into the Thunderdome.
You're like, I just developed a cheat sheet.
Walking into a Thunderdome. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that, you could just figure out the tricks, the kid tricks, and then like that applied to all kids. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. I was real mad when I figured that one out.
One of the things that I've come to grips with is like books are not meant to take literally when you're becoming a new parent. These are suggestions that like might happen, but probably won't happen to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we need is like the mystery science theater that goes with the book. Like we need someone to read the chapter and then be like in the bleachers, like yelling what really is happening, you know?
That's right. It's like the two grandpas in the Muppets who just sit in the background and they just comment constantly on like everything. That's what we need. Every book I tried to read, it just felt like it didn't apply to me. I think, and something I'd love to touch on too, I guess as we talk more, is like the representation of fathers in literature has always been very like non-existent to a fact, and it's something that like we try to push that narrative out because there's a lot of involved dads, like more than people think, and like and the stigma of like, oh, you're just the dad, or you're way to go, you're doing your job. You know, it's like,
thanks for babysitting.
Yeah, like that stuff. Like, oh, I had someone tell me that once and I got so angry. Like, what do you mean babysitting? This is my kid. Like,
I don't get paid for this.
Yeah, I don't get paid for this.
I'm going to send my wife an invoice. See how that goes.
Yeah. I don't know if she'll accept that invoice.
She's going to be like,
yeah, exactly.
I got an invoice for you.
Yeah, good to take the trash. But a part of that is like why I took my daughter like grocery shopping every weekend with me. Like me and my daughter just go grocery shopping now. Like that's our thing. But that's part of the reason why I wanted to do it was because it's like, I remember going the first couple of times and people just being like, oh, isn't that cute? You're able to do this. And I'm like, able to do what? Be a dad? Like, I don't understand what you're...
Push the shopping cart?
Yeah.
Like...
You mean have a kid in the cart while I'm shopping? And even going to the doctors, like, speaking of like, you know, when we were going to like our medical provider at the time, like they never talked to me. Like they talked to my wife.
Interesting.
And then they would look at me and go, do you have any questions? And I'm like, well, no, you never once talked to me. So I stopped listening to you. If you were talking to her, talk to her. And so, but it became like a sore spot almost. Because it's like, so one of the things that me and Lisa do is like, we alternate like doctor's visits, we alternate dentist visits, like just so that they have to talk to both of us.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is a quick tangent story.
Let's do it.
I took my daughter to the dentist and, you know, you fill out the paperwork and they're like asking me questions and they're like, oh, we'll wait for the mom to come in. And I was like, oh, well, mom's not coming in. It's just me. And they're like, oh. And I was like, you can ask me the questions. And they're like, okay. So they're asking me like, oh, when's her birthday? You know, when was her last visit?
This isn't rocket science, guys.
Right.
Like,
but they're like, oh, what's your insurance? And I was like, oh, you should contact the mom for that.
Yeah.
And then,
phone a friend. I'll be right back.
Yeah. I'll be like, give me a moment. And I was like, hey, what insurance do we have? And she's like, it's your insurance. Don't you know yours? I was like, oh.
That's a cool role reversal. I like it.
So that was a little bit of a waka waka moment where it was just like, you know, touche society.
Mm-hmm.
But the more that I go in now, like when I take her to the doctors, you know, they know me, they know my wife separately. I think it's just more about being like present. You know, I want to be acknowledged in these visits. I don't want you to just talk to the mom when you're there. Like, so that's why we try to like make sure that I have a voice and not like sit to the side. I'll be point on this one. You sit down this time, you know what I mean? Like, and I think a lot of dads want that, but sometimes it's hard to like, it's like playing jump rope almost. You have to like jump in. Like if you're not, you know, if you're not ready, you're not going to get in there. So
that's a great metaphor. That's really true. Yeah. Well, I think it's a really good point though, because like first you were talking about sort of like the way that like dads are portrayed, right? Which is sort of the like come home from work and I would like someone to bring me my slippers and the newspaper and like what, you know, like,
and
like
what's
I'm
for
just
dinner?
Here. And not only those kinds of messages, but then like from the other side, you're getting like, why are you the parent that's here that's bringing your own kid to a doctor visit? Like, why is that even a question that's being asked? Because let's face it, like you could be a 2-dad household for all that provider knows, and that is not their freaking business, you know?
Exactly.
Like ask the parent that's there.
Yeah.
If they have to phone a friend and call the other parent, that's fine.
I mean, and I'm okay with that. Like, there's plenty of things like, I grew up with ADHD, and I still suffer from it. So I forget a billion things, but like, I'm trying, right? And I think that's the hard part, is like, it makes you feel sometimes like, why do I try then? Like, if I'm going to be received or perceived this way. You mentioned the Kansas City PSI conference, and Dan Sigley had a great session about like dads and like perception of dads and literature and like and just in society and in general. So and it really like just hit home with me a lot. And I talked to him after the workshop, and I was just like, man, I felt like crying, like just listening to it, because it felt I felt at that time like what he was saying was so representative of like how I feel as a dad. And
was that the Sunday workshop?
Yeah.
I believe you heard it here first. This is breaking news that is going to be a 2-day training.
Oh, that's awesome.
At the next conference.
It should be. It was a very powerful, like, and there were a lot of dads in that group, in that, like therapists.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was the makeup of folks who were there? Like, is that something that I could slide in on and like learn some stuff? Or like, is it really more for dads?
It's for everybody. And I think that's the idea. And it's
awesome.
One of the things I took away from him as well is like, it's dads talking about and trying to voice their concerns or things, is not to overshadow the mom at all. Like, we still love and represent and want to help care for, the moms, but the dads, it sometimes feels weird as a dad to say like, well, I need some love too. It feels like almost like, oh, now dads are infringing on postpartum depression now. Like, oh, you guys are suffering from this now? What a coincidence that, and it sucks to say that, because it's like, I don't want people to think that like men are trying to claim this now and try to like take this away. But like, to be fair, I wish it was all taken away, right? I wish nobody went through this, right? Like, it's not about a specific group going through it, but I think that also like holds dads back from like really expressing, is like they don't want to overshadow their pain that the moms or their partners are feeling.
But I think like that, I'm glad you brought it back to that, because that is like one of the most common things that we do to ourselves and to each other whenever we're like sharing a lived experience and someone else has like a similar lived experience, is like, then we get into this competition, maybe not with the other person, but within ourselves. Like, am I allowed to feel the thing that I'm feeling because my trauma isn't as bad as your trauma? Like, do I need to keep my stuff to myself because your stuff is worse? Or is my stuff worthy of help as well?
Yeah.
And the answer is always the latter. It's just that we don't talk about it like that very often.
I mean, it's hard to continue that cycle, and I think that's what's great about the support groups that we go to, that we help, and everything that PSI does is that helps break that generational stigma of that feeling, and it's great to see so many dads and moms going to like the parenthood meetings and going to the dad groups and the mom groups and all the groups that they have, right? Like, it's an amazing thing to see that people don't realize that are out there.
Yeah.
We should mention the group that we were talking about. Should we mention the group we were talking about in our pre-recording meeting? We had a great idea. Megan Roberts, let us know what you think.
We play video games online and talk about feelings.
Yeah. We got to in with Lisette, so I'll post that to her and say, hey, she's like, okay, well, you're going to be the host. You're running it.
I will co-host that with you. 10 out of 10.
I will be there for the conversation. I'm not a gamer, but maybe I could become I don't know. I'm trying.
Very casual, like low.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? Well, my kid didn't eat dinner tonight. Let's talk about that. And how does that make you feel?
And you know what? Sometimes it's just easier if you've got something else to do. Like, your attention is somewhere else to have a real conversation. It's kind of like when you're driving in the car, you can have a conversation with my 12-year-old about puberty.
Get into the real stuff.
Right? We don't have to look at each other's face and make it weird and awkward for anybody, but I could just be focusing on the road and looking around and going, hey, we end up having really great conversations. So I think similarly, playing some kind of video games that don't require a lot of high level thinking, but like holding space
so
to hang out.
So no Trivial Pursuit video game. You know what I'm saying?
No,
right.
No, but just having like a nice hangout and just talking about feelings. I mean, I'm here for it.
Definitely
Megan, get back to us. Is that an approved type of support group? I don't know. Hey, outside of the box thinking.
Honestly, video games was one of the things that I turned to for like when things were hard. I was like, I need something that is just easy and fun. So I like dusted off the N64, plugged that thing in, had to blow the cartridge out, like to like, yep. You know, played some 007, still remembered all my good hiding spots, felt really good about that. Like, I was like, I think I'm going to be okay, you know?
I think we'll work through this.
I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely utilized like, you know, I work in the video game industry. So, you know, I utilized like video games during that time, which is funny because like I had the PS5 had just come out and I actually was able to get one and it sat on next to my fireplace for like almost a year. I didn't even open it up. It just sat there.
Sat in the box.
Yeah, it was just that. And then one day Lisette's like, are you going to open this? Like, what are you doing with this?
Why didn't you open it?
Oh, I just didn't have the energy. Like, I didn't, like, it was like, I didn't care.
And that's how you know that the symptoms you're experiencing are a problem.
If you're a gamer and if you're uninterested in gaming, then call PSI.
Yeah, it just sat there. Yeah. And then like I finally opened it up and I was like, and I played, you know, I started playing some games and stuff like that. And I felt it started to help me. Like it was like a release factor almost. And then like, you know, I played a lot of mobile games and like, it's not that I'm doing it to like shuck my responsibilities but it's like help grounding me.
Yes.
For some reason, like playing this one game was like 10 minutes of it. And I just felt like calm, just readjust myself back into like normalcy in a way. Having kids is hard, man.
I didn't think that's what it was going to feel like. Surprise.
Yeah, I had a friend who told me, he's like, be prepared for the zombie phase. And I was like, I'm good. I was like, I used to stay up all night playing video games. But there's like a difference when you're like...
For 12 months?
When you're tired and you have a screaming child and you're like playing a video game. Like there's a huge difference. You can put one down. You can't put, you know... I can walk away from one. I can't walk away from the other. And so there is definitely a huge transition period that I think dads, we don't go, like one of the things that we always talk about in our dad groups is like when moms find out that they're pregnant, right? They have this like kind of transition into motherhood kind of almost right away, right? Like you then realize like your body is not your own anymore, right? It's like
more immediate change for... Exactly.
Like
everything carrying the child. Yeah.
You start thinking about everything from that moment to like everything, right? I'm not a mother, so I'm assuming all of this, but
you're right. There is an element of a light switch.
Yeah. And then it's like, you start to look at life differently at this point, right? Like that's my guess. And it's like for dads, it's like when I was told I was going to be a father, I was like so happy. I was like over the moon. Like I was waiting for this moment for my whole life. And, but it doesn't sink in until you see your child, right? Until you hold your baby for the first time. Because up until that point, I was still Chris. And then as soon as my daughter was born, now I'm dad. So there's no transition of like mentality, physicality, things like that, right? And so that's one of the things that kind of, and especially when me and my wife had our baby during the pandemic, so there was no like, go to a class, go to this, do this. There was none of it. It was all shut down. And so we were really like behind the 8 ball, so to speak, when it came to that. And so, and it's not an excuse, but it's more of a thinking of like, man, like I wish I had been able to like go to my wife's medical appointments. I couldn't. I had to sit in the garage and wait for her.
Oh God, yeah.
You know? I heard my daughter's heartbeat for the first time over FaceTime. I saw my daughter for the first time, her first ultrasound over FaceTime. It's a huge loss for me because I'll never experience, if we decide to have another child, then yes, I'll be able to have that experience again. But if we don't, this was my chance to experience it for the first time as a new parent.
Yeah.
And it was taken away from us. And so the expectation of pregnancy, of childbirth, my daughter was born Saturday morning at 11:11 on November 14th.
3 days earlier, man. 11.
She was a week late, though, to be fair. She was chilling and she was like happy. But, when my daughter was born Saturday morning, me and my wife were home Sunday night.
Whoa, yeah.
That was the level of care that we got from our medical provider at the time. And so, again, it's just all about like how things were back then during that time frame for the pandemic. It was hard. It added so much extra stress. Also, by the way, we had just bought a house, which probably in retrospect, maybe not do that.
So you took on a couple of things at the same time, is what you're saying.
We moved. We did a lot of things. We moved. We bought a house. We, had a baby,
Wait, so
living through a pandemic.
My mind is catching up on the math. So like that means that your kiddo was born 3 years ago, that you got pregnant not knowing surprise pandemic.
Correct.
And then immediately pandemic.
Correct.
Oh no.
Oh,
correct.
That's not what you want. Mm-mm.
Luckily, this didn't
Nobody
take into
wants that.
effect, but I was in Argentina for work 2 weeks before the world shut down.
Oh,
wow.
God.
And if I had stayed one extra day, I would not have been able to come home for months.
Chris.
Yeah.
There was a huge, crazy, time frame. We didn't know because we didn't know.
You're like, somebody get me on a plane.
Yeah, we were leaving. I think we were leaving Saturday morning, and then that Sunday they closed the airports, and they were like, no in and outs, nothing. And I was like, oh.
Did you just get home and go, oh my God?
It was weird. Yeah, so the crazy thing about that trip was I had to find, because I didn't have a mask with me, and Lisette was like, you gotta wear a mask. And this is before everybody knew all of the crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And I spent all Saturday morning hunting for a mask, and they had none left in the city. Luckily, one of my coworkers who lives there, he was like, oh, I have some extra ones. Here, take these.
Whew.
So he gave me some, but
close call.
That was a crazy trip. It was a crazy time.
Right. She's like, don't come home with whatever germs are on that airplane. We're not about that life.
Yeah. It was just a crazy time, being pregnant, buying a house, the pandemic, there's just so much
unexpected mental health complication, right?
There's so much that, I think that's where everybody started to really understand the effects of mental health on everybody. It's just it's a real thing. And, postpartum depression and everything like that is just, it's all part of this horrible circle.
Mm-hmm. And it can happen to all parents.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The biggest statistic that I found out when I was going to the PSI groups is 1 in 10 dads suffer from postpartum depression. 1 in 10 dads. And then not even to throw into consideration, what if they're BIPOC? What if, things like that.
Right.
Right.
So it's
right. Anything else that could add a layer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what happens. You add another layer, it could be even more. It's it's just a very alarming thing but I'm glad that there are companies and places like PSI that can help kind of push it to the masses and give that help that people need.
Yeah. And Chris, you're a huge part of that. We're so
try
glad
to be.
I try to
We're
be.
lucky to have you.
Yeah.
I always tell everybody PSI saved my life, saved my wife's life, saved my marriage, saved everything.
Oh,
I owe
dang.
so much to PSI that I will always be there for whatever they need me to do.
Well, you know what I'm here for, Chris. Do you think do you think you might be ready to jump into the lightning round?
Whew, I was a little nervous. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, you might want to limber up a little bit.
You look like you're kind of loosening up.
Yeah, I got to stretch because I'm not always the best quick thinker.
This doesn't go fast. It's just called the lightning round.
How about
for no
we call
reason
it the fourth trimester round? Would that make you
There you
feel
go.
more
That makes
comfortable?
sense.
Less pressure? All right,
Less pressure.
Less pressure than the third trimester. Woo! Never mind. But I digress. Okay. Chris. Emily, calm down. We're trying to do the lightning round. Okay. Chris, besides this podcast, what's your favorite podcast if you'd like to recommend one or more than one?
I listen to a lot of like video games but I will say one thing that I love to recommend is so I have a good friend of mine and he has a pretty funny podcast called Bad Advice Wednesdays.
I like it already.
I grew up with him. You know, he's got a bit of a social media following now. His name is the Speech Professor. You know, it's funny. He's very lighthearted, but he's very like, you know, he's very aware, and so like it's pretty awesome to listen to. Another one that I really like to, big up is Reginald Day. His podcast, Get At Me Dad podcast. His content on Instagram. I actually followed him on Instagram, and then it turned out that he was on the webinar that I did with Dan Sigley. And I was like, fanboyed out on him. I was like, dude, I follow you on Instagram. You are amazing. Like his content is hilarious. Yeah. So those two podcasts, I definitely highly recommend. Just their content is really interesting for dads, parents, and stuff like that. So please check them out. And also I'm starting my own podcast that I've kind of put into the works. So
we can't wait.
Quickly say it's called the Dadcast.
There we go.
And, I've been writing and getting ready to record and start kind of pushing that out there to get more ears on mental health.
How humble of you.
Yeah.
It's coming in third recommended.
It is. It should be.
Thank you for telling everybody about it.
Okay, next question. And I'm going to preface this with, as someone who also has ADHD, sometimes I love this question and sometimes I don't. Do you prefer a book in your ear or a book in your hand? Or hear me out, what if you're not into books?
So I am into books. I haven't read, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my bookcase right now. I'm trying to see what was the last thing I read. It was a book called Labyrinth, was the last book I read.
Oh.
And it's actually, so I'm a huge Tupac fan. Out of the abnormally huge Tupac fan. And so this book is based off of like, you know, his murder and the unfortunate murder of the Notorious B.I.G. And so it was written by the investigator who was covering the murder. And it was such an amazing book. It's an unfortunate, amazing story because, like I said, it's about two people that I really enjoyed their music and their message. So that was the last book I read, but I think I probably prefer more of audiobooks now. Just because it's easier to get on the go. And like, I love that Lisette is like, she listens to audiobooks all the time. I think she was just listening to like Leslie Jones's biography, and she was laughing her butt off. Like she's like, this is so awesome. Funny. So
that's the best recommendation is when someone's got something in their ears and they're laughing really loud. You're like, what's happening?
I'll have what she's having.
Yeah, she'll be like, we'll be like laying in bed, just like, you know, getting ready to go to sleep, and she's like listening. She's like, ha, ha, ha. I'm like, what's going on? Are we okay? What's happening?
Everything cool?
I don't know what's going on. I know she definitely would recommend that book. Has been hilarious.
Chris, what do you do for a quick mental break?
Oh man. So one of the great things that were like recommended to me was like cold water therapy is like a huge thing. So like even when it's cold, like going into the bathroom or the kitchen, wherever, and like just splashing water on your face and like resets your sensory and like helps like kind of shock your system back into like
that sounds cold.
A focal. It's very cold, especially around this time. So that's been a great thing. And one of the things I always recommend to dads is taking a breath of fresh air, taking a walk around the block, doing something that you like to do for yourself. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be, you know, some people like to go work out. For me, you know, I'll, you know, play video games or playing with my daughter and like hanging out with her and like, you know, listening to her and just like being amazed at like the stories that she's telling me now. So those are the things I do right now for that quick mental break.
I dig it. What is your favorite parenting hack or most recommended?
Most recommended. So if your child is teething, this was passed down to me. You take a cold washcloth, run it under water, and then freeze it, and you just let them go to town on it.
Oh.
It's amazing. They love it. That was like our biggest probably parenting hack, I think. Now that my daughter's a little bit older, the thing I've been doing now, I saw this on Instagram, was, kids get into that snack phase where they're like, I want this, I want this. And I was like, I don't want to keep getting up and down for you to take a snack. So I actually made her a snack basket. You put a bunch of healthy snacks into a basket, and you're like, if you want a snack, go get it yourself. You're old enough. I'll open it for you. But, so now she'll go over to her little basket on the bookshelf, and she'll pick her snack out. She'll go sit down, eat it, and then, she's good to go.
You're also teaching
smart.
Independence, which is super cool.
Well, and she knows that if she runs out of that one thing, she's not going to get it until next week when we refill the snack basket. So if you eat all of one thing, the other thing we've started doing is we've been putting her snack with her dinner, so that we kind of make it so she wants to eat a snack, but she doesn't want to eat dinner. So here's both. You can have a snack and a little bit of dinner, and it's been working really well for us so far, I would say. Hopefully. I feel like it has.
Until it doesn't, and then you'll adjust again.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
You won't, because you know what? You can answer that question.
Yeah, you can answer it, Chris.
That's right.
Chris, what is one thing you will do to show yourself some radical love today?
Oh, man. That's a great question.
Thanks.
It's hard. I think today it's just about letting yourself know hey, you're doing a great job. A lot of our problems, I think, come from us having self-doubt, or we're not doing enough, or we should be doing more, whatever the case is, right? And I feel like giving myself grace, and just being present, I think, is the stuff that I'll try to give myself today, give that love. One of the things my therapist had always asked me, she asked me every session if I feel like I'm a good dad. And I've always had a hard time saying yes to that question. And it kind of goes hand in hand with showing love to yourself, is to say yes, I am a good dad. Telling myself that I'm a good dad is showing yourself love, and everybody should tell themselves that they're a great parent, because if you're out here in this minefield we call parenthood, then you're doing an amazing job. Sometimes we step on the mine, sometimes we don't, and it's a hard thing to navigate this life we live.
Absolutely. Okay, so aside from splashing it on your face, how do you take your water?
That's a great question. As I've gotten older, room temperature water that's where it's at. Okay. It's not this cold water that these youngins think that is the real deal. Give me some room temperature water.
Give me some lukewarm water.
In a nice Hydro Flask, and we're good to go.
Yes.
Okay.
Team Hydro Flask.
I'm not about the Stanley Cup. I'm not about that thing. I'm Team Hydro Flask, mostly because I have 50 of them here, and I'm not getting more. Not buying something new.
This was not sponsored, but
no,
if Hydro Flask is interested, hey.
Or Stanley. I mean, you guys can fight it out.
Let me know which one you think is better. I want to know. But yeah, I'm all about that room temperature water.
Well, Chris, if folks would like to get a hold of you, they, liked what you had to say, just had some questions, wanted to reach out, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Definitely, yeah. I'm on Instagram, CRB47, or you can hit me at the Dadcast. I'm always up for a chat.
You are a great conversationalist, Chris.
I try to be. It's hard sometimes. Sometimes I'm just you know what? Let's just talk, see what happens. See where this goes.
Emily, you want to take us out?
I would. Okay. So, Chris, I would like to thank you for coming and being on the pod today, but I really would like to thank you for talking a lot about the perspective of the dad with the lived experience that you've had. You are our second dad, someone who identifies as dad on our pod, and you both brought completely unique and different perspectives. So thank you for coming and sharing your story.
Thank you guys. I always enjoy talking with you guys, and it always makes me feel super yeah, let's go do some more stuff now. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the I Am One podcast. Check out today's show notes where we'll drop links to all the important things that we mentioned in this episode. Please consider sharing about I Am One on social media and following and rating our show wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. It only takes a minute of your time and, well, that'll help our collective mission of bringing resources and local support to folks worldwide. From everyone here at PSI, thanks again for listening.